Hi everyone, and welcome back to Womansplain. Today we are hosting our first guest ever on the show, Caitlin Begg. She's fantastic, a female founder and subject matter expert on authenticity in AI. So we're gonna have a good little show about her. So we're gonna pass it off to Caitlin to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks. So happy to be here. Love the podcast. So my name is Caitlin Begg. I also go by Katie. Some of you listening might know me that way. I founded Authentic Social in 2016 as a result of my undergraduate Harvard thesis on digital communication. I actually did it on the side for a little bit when I was a senior, and I worked at LinkedIn after graduation in San Francisco, and I was on the West Coast. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. and do work for Authentic Social with East Coast clients. So it was that 6 to 9 a.m. window. And then a year after I was at LinkedIn, went full-time with Authentic Social. We've been full-time now since 2017, and without any outside funding have grown since then. And we focus on something called socio-technical system strategy, so the joint optimization of social and technical systems. And within those realms, specifically on socio-technical selling and digital communication and reducing dysfunctions within the workplace, especially as it relates to asynchronous communication, so meaning communication that exists outside of a steady stream, so text messages, Slack, hybrid remote work, things like that. Okay. I'm also a sociological researcher, and I do independent research that I present around the US and Europe on those topics.
That's
awesome.
Great.
I mean, obviously you mentioned your thesis, digital communication, understood. What really inspired you to kind of start this company and also your research? Would love to just learn a little bit more about that.
Sure, and I think this is relevant to everyone who's listening. I started college in 2012, the fall of 2012, and graduated in 2016. And at that time, social media was definitely a lot newer. The algorithmic-based technologies had not yet permeated our everyday in the same way that they do now. And I was really interested in the ways that social media seemed to be changing our relationship dynamics, our commercial interests, and things of that sort. So even in the way of, I remember thinking about who is it that you follow? I mean, Instagram, when I came into college, was still a photo editing app. Yeah. And these dynamics around who are you following, who are you not following, things like that. And that escalated to the point where senior year, I thought it was really interesting to consider what communication does in terms of both workplace and personal life, and see kind of what we can understand from those realms.
And you mentioned you started your career at LinkedIn,
yes.
And then you found you kind of worked alongside your corporate job with this new startup. So how did you balance that, and what made you want to go full-time with Authentic Social?
Yeah, and that's something I recommend actually for anyone who's listening to this who might be considering starting their own company, is definitely do something on the side before you decide to take that leap, even if it's just market testing or something like that. What I did was, as I started to write the thesis, at that time, the idea of aligning our digital and real world selves, that joint optimization, and the idea of there being all these dysfunctions and asynchronous communication that really permeate our work life and our personal life still was a pretty new idea. And I thought that applying those to sales and to communication strategy within organizational behavior and structure was interesting. But as someone who at that time was only 21, it was a little bit of a big play. So I had my offer at LinkedIn, and I thought it's really important to build and have a professional network. I didn't want to just go full time from there. So I really focused on doing smaller things. So in college, I did a lot of market research. I had small calls with people to figure out what parts of what I was interested in worked and hit. And I think as founders, to go into it with a little bit of an open mind as you're starting and not be so locked into one hyper niche, because that might not be what other people are most interested in. And that was true for me. I thought that maybe the social media end would be where I would go, but actually the social selling end was where I had the most expertise and outbound and creative input. At one point, I had the highest response rate at LinkedIn. So integrating those into things. But that early market testing was really helpful, and being able to have people give insights in not a longitudinal way. And then when I left LinkedIn, I made sure that I secured enough contracts where it would exceed my salary. And so that way I was able to go and not have any funding.
What's been the hardest part of being a first-time founder, and especially female?
Two things come to mind. First is that I did it at a very young age. So I left LinkedIn a year after graduation, and that was tough because you don't have a real community around you. And I really did like working at LinkedIn and having a group of friends. But what I've been able to do in New York and worldwide through my research is really meet people who are interested in the same things that I'm interested in, and whether that be the academic realm or the startup realm, making sure that if you are a founder, if you're thinking about being a founder, to make sure that you have that network and you're building that network. So that's the first thing. And the other difficult thing was figuring out what are my goals and how can I achieve them in terms of what are my benchmarks and how can I do this without the funding realm. The reason why I didn't decide to go the VC route, and I actually got very close to working with people who would fund it, but it didn't make sense in the end, is because I wanted to have that freedom of the research and things. And so figuring out for you, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, and what your end goal is. Do you want to exit and have a unicorn? For me, what's important is having a sustainable enterprise that I can do for the rest of my life, and it's a passion project that will last throughout. So it's different goals, and figuring out if it is something that you want to exit and be a multi-time founder, that you're going to have different goals and different things that you want to focus on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really impressive that you're able to bootstrap, especially like as an investor. Both of us think I've seen just founders over the years. And I think it's also, for me, like why I think you've been so successful is you've pivoted a lot.
Yeah.
And some of that has been, external. Obviously, like the introduction of new technology has been a lot in the past, few years, especially in 2012 and 2016. How has kind of the introduction of the pandemic, AI, how has that sort of shifted maybe your goals and the company, your research?
Yeah, so when I spoke with a lot of clients and potential clients around the pandemic, I noticed that a lot of companies were having dysfunctions as it pertains to asynchronous communication. So hybrid and remote work was causing a lot of people to act on as if they were on an island. There weren't as many systems being conversant and things of that sort. When I would bring it up to clients or potential clients, they would dismiss it as, communication is just a byproduct of something else, of sales, of go-to-market, of whatever. I looked into the research, and there's some research on this, but not enough that was agile and recent. And so I decided to do an extension of my 2016 thesis and do this independent research that would show that asynchronous communication has an effect on the workplace and really on the bottom line as well. Especially as it pertains to attrition rates. And an interesting figure in that is that U.S. businesses lose over $1 trillion each year due to voluntary attrition. So it's a huge problem. But a big reason for this voluntary attrition in this digital and remote work realm is asynchronous communication dysfunctions, not feeling as if there's a sense of belonging. And author Sandy Rogers wrote a book, Leading Loyalty, on this topic, that it is very kind of prescient around this, but companies a lot of times don't know how to solve that. So I pivoted and was like, okay, I'm going to do this research. I went and I presented research at the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Forum in Munich and a lot of other conferences around, so a Future of Work conference in Finland. I spoke 3 different times, and this was alongside assistant Wharton professors, UCLA professors, things of that sort. So PhD level without the PhD, and that really gave me the creds, I guess, if you will, right? So that people started to listen to what I was saying.
Well,
and
super impressive.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back, because I've known you for 5+ years, and I've watched you really dive into this research. I know one time I couldn't get in touch with you for 24 hours because you literally bought a landline and took turned off your phone. So you're really in this research. You actually from the academic side of things, do your research in terms of reading different authors, speaking, but I feel you're really, being a part of it in terms of actually taking a part of not in communication. So tell me a little bit more about how you started that and why you think that was important in terms of actually taking a part and not being a part of social media for however number of hours, etc.
So in 2021, I said that my goal for the year was to be more creative. And so I started out with, naturally, posting on TikTok.
Yes, I remember the TikTok era.
And I posted a lot about sociology and psychology and my thesis. And it was encouraging. People were interested in my hyperfixations around generations and technology and communication. But I hit a wall in terms of, I felt like I was speaking into a void. And I also felt like I was regurgitating other people's research and that I really needed to get into things on my own terms. And so even though I had gotten around 30,000 followers, it was just a side thing. It was something to really, again, do that market testing to see, are people interested in this before I do the research on the other end? Because my academic research, I care about it not just from the academic ends, but also from the practical ends. That's something I'm passionate about, is combining praxis and theory. And so I went from that to really diving in, and on the 5th of September 2022, I had been carrying around this book, Society of the Spectacle, for months, and I had been trying to get myself back into reading. Naturally, I tried to brute force it by taking one of the most complex pieces of critical theory, French critical theory, that you can have. Sola knows this, and Brooke, you probably do too, from that summer where I had this book that the pages had fallen out, and my fiance had taken them, swam to the bottom of the pool, and laid them out.
Oh, God, what a gem.
I carried it with me everywhere. But I woke up that morning, and just because my ADHD ADHD brain, my phone was on the other side of the room or something, and it was a rainy morning, and Andreas was still sleeping, and I woke up and I read the final 50% of that book in just one sitting, and that just kind of carried me into the rest of the day. And I noticed that my brain felt really different. And again, this was by accident, not planned, but something in me was very amazed by the way that my neural mechanism seems to just shift from this change in behavior. And so in my Team Extreme way, every day since the 5th of September, 2022, I've begun each morning with reading nonfiction, whether it's a page on a busy morning before a flight or sometimes immersing myself in several different chapters. This has helped me regain a balanced approach to technology. And something that I take issue with is when we speak about balanced approaches to technology, a lot of what we hear is, quite frankly, quick clickbait. We hear, oh, I ditched my smartphone for a flip phone. That was in the New York Times recently. And we hear other things like, well, it doesn't matter. Technology is here to stay and we have to deal with it. I believe in both things. I do think that when we're Team Extreme and we say we're going to get rid of our phones, that is not a way to have balance in our everyday life. And so what I coined Projects in Progression to Analog, which is also the name of my podcast, where I explore ways to have a more human every day. I've done these projects myself, and so besides the waking up each morning and reading, it also involves lots of different things. So purchasing a landline and using it, and going 81 plus hours without a phone, and something called a dérive, a French term for drifting and wandering and being caught by your surroundings in a walk and not having a set time of, oh, I need to go for exactly 30 minutes or this amount of time, and allowing yourself to drift and be creative and immerse yourself in those things.
So I'm really curious because you work with these companies and clients and help them with their social selling strategy and focusing on, I guess, more of the technological aspect in terms of how they are able to sell and connect with their consumers. So how do you kind of balance this progression to analog with working with these clients that you kind of need to use social media for that connection?
Sure, and that's exactly what progression to analog is, and exactly what Authentic Social does. Is it's making sure that companies understand that it's a dialectic of exchange between technology and more analog methods. It's not an elimination of
just
either
like one or the other.
No, it's not just doing analog methods, because quite frankly, that just wouldn't work. And it's also not technological methods. Actually, socio-technical system strategy is something that's a little bit more popular in Europe, but it's about the joint optimization of social and technical systems. It resulted from World War II joint optimization of man and machine for some different elements there. But the thing I do with clients, and what Authentic Social does through our socio-technical selling process, is really looking at what are the social systems within the organization. Are you remote? Are you hybrid? What's the makeup of the salespeople? What's their experience level like? What's their conversational ability? Are they doing pitch-based things where they're reading off of a script, or do they know how to have that conversation-based approach? Because something interesting is that even with the advent of artificial intelligence, especially, I mean, it's a multi-decade thing, but it kind of came to an interesting head last year with OpenAI and everything. Response rates for sales were actually at the lowest last year. And that's a really interesting thing. It's because a lot of companies took a purely technical approach to sales, and not just to sales, to go to market, to operations, things like that, but specifically as it pertains to sales, and just threw tons of messages out there and didn't make it personalized, didn't have that analog kind of element to it, which is a big part of sales, especially in business-to-business technology, where you're making more complex sales. But even on the consumer end, where you're trying to connect with that consumer, making sure that the people representing your company know how to really handle objections live and know how to connect with the person, because I've seen a lot of deals fall through at the last second because of asynchronous communication dysfunctions, or because of just following a technical protocol for sales. And go-to-market and sales are two things, and communication strategy, that there's technical elements that are very important that you don't want to exclude, but you need to make sure that there is that socio-technical approach.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit more context of what is asynchronous communication dysfunction? Like,
Sure.
What are some examples? Obviously, I think I can kind of understand, but would love to just understand from your
Really
perspective.
simple example for the audience is when someone ghosts you. So
asynchronous
communication is communication that exists outside of a steady stream.
Okay.
So on the personal element, that is texting, and that can be social media. It can be image-based too. It can be social media. On the professional end, that also involves Slack and things of that
Email.
sort. Today, we have the same amount of time as we did a few decades ago, but since the 1960s, we have 7 times the amount of conversation channels in our everyday.
Wow.
And so that really gets to how much our brains are clogged by this hypercommunication, and that's a term coined by a French sociologist, Jean Baudrillard, which is excess inbound and outbound communication. And I'm sure everyone listening to this feels this way,
yeah.
that there's a lot of communication going on, and what can we do about it from a personal and professional end. It's really, we need to first take control of our own personal lives, because we hear so much on the macro end about artificial intelligence, about notifications, about this, about that, but we need to zoom in and first make sure that our lives, our own personal lives, are put together before we can then help or advise clients or do things on a macro scale. I've even spoken to clients where we're trying to implement some type of AI system, and the executives themselves don't really understand it because they're a little bit busy or strung out. So understanding how to do that in your own world. And the first step to do that is really taking control of Do Not Disturb and having multiple different ones. I have my phone in Do Not Disturb 24/7, sometimes on a personal one where I have people who can get through for work. But making sure that you take control of your communication and don't let it take control of you. That's one way to start, even for founders.
Yeah,
That's
no,
awesome.
I mean, I feel like I'm taking control, especially at work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it feels so invasive. And I'm interested about your sort of research around remote work too. I mean, obviously it's more difficult. Communication is way more difficult when you're not face to face, but remote work has so many great implications, especially for women. What is your opinion on how to make remote work successful in terms of communication? Because I feel like that's the biggest barrier.
Sure. So the first thing goes to making sure that we reduce voluntary attrition so that you can keep the remote workforce as they are and create a community, because voluntary attrition is very, very cost inhibiting for companies. But as people continue to leave, it can cost anywhere from 1 times to 4 times someone's salary, and that can really be difficult, because if someone leaves and then they're in the office, onboarding them is a little bit less difficult. But if they're not, making sure that they're a part of this system is very difficult. So putting measures into place where there are community building activities, or hybrid in a way that isn't going in every week, but perhaps once a quarter or a couple times a year. And sometimes what works for different companies is even going on, for salespeople, even going on a Zoom for an hour and just doing their own work and having it open so that they can engage in that synchronous dialogue to idea share and communicate. But also knowing that the average worker spends anywhere from 3 hours and 43 minutes to over 6 hours a day wasting time with asynchronous communication. So that's whenever a company says to me, well, why should I care about this? That's why you should care. That is a huge time suck.
Yeah,
huge.
It should be around the 2-hour mark, 2 to maybe the upper end 3. But really what's happening is that there's too many of these micro conversations going on. So little asks, little asks, little asks. And then what happens every time that occurs is that if you were in a realm of deep thought down to here, about to get to something that was about ideation or creation, that goes way back to the surface. It's hard to be able to have that deep level of thought. So understanding first, from a qualitative data standpoint, from the employee standpoint, where does everyone think that the dysfunctions are? Where does leadership think it is? Because oftentimes there's disconnections there. So making sure to solve for those, and then going from there to figure out, okay, what are some ways that we can make sure that synchronous communication or meetings is for ideation, creation, or things that need to have those things. What are some norms around asynchronous communication of, do we need to ping everyone for things, or should we have maybe internal GPTs where we have knowledge bases and things where people can ask simple questions in a way that's leveraging AI?
Yeah, and companies have that too. I feel like a different version of GPT.
Definitely.
But on the topic of research, I know you've spoken all over the world at different conferences. Tell us more about, the research other than, the remote work that we just talked about.
Yeah, so at the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Forum in Munich in September, I spoke about artificial intelligence's effect on conversation. And an interesting statistic on the personal end of this is that if parents want their child to opt out of My AI, so if they don't want them to be able to engage with this built-in AI chatbot with Snapchat, they have to pay, at the time of when this conference was, I don't know if it has adjusted, $49 for Snapchat Plus per year. Now,
really,
as it pertains to working class families and for parents who don't know what's going on, that's a dangerous thing, because even if a parent pays for this and is able to pay for this, it could cancel. And the fact that a lot of companies are learning off of children's data and vulnerable populations is very concerning. So that's something that I was speaking about. And at this conference, what was interesting to me is that when they were speaking about artificial intelligence, they had China and the U.S. on the same slide in one of the plenary speeches. And So what I like to look at is one of the ways that AI affects conversation and why we should care is that the algorithmization of everyday life. And so people take what they see on Instagram and on other means, and they integrate that into conversation. So that leads to unified consumption, unified conversation, and these differences that made up all these creative parts to us become a little bit more unified because we're just kind of repeating what we're seeing and we're not being as creative. And so making sure within the enterprise that you're ensuring opportunities for psychological safety, Amy Edmondson, open dialogue, allowing opportunities for people to fail well and not feel like they have to be perfect, because within social media, people definitely feel that way. And in order to get to these great innovations, you have to be able to have these micro failures. Amy Edmondson wrote about this in her book, Right Kind of Wrong, which won Financial Times Best Business Book of the Year. And I work with her on some things. And that's a great book to get started just on how can I take all of these pressure to be perfect from social media and from technology and realize that it's okay to fail and it's okay to innovate. Because
totally.
On the other end of it, if we're not failing, we're not innovating, and we're not getting to where we need to be, whether that's on a micro scale with a sales team or whether that's on a scale with relationships in our personal life, or there's so many different applications to it. But the research as a whole, really part of the goal was to let American companies know what's going on in Europe and the like. But actually, unexpected consequence of this is that most of my work now is European based. I have an office in New York and Amsterdam, and I speak a lot in Europe, and European based market research companies actually work with me to give them insights on some of the kind of intersection of research and practice here, because a lot of times these worlds are very separate and they're not conversant. That's same thing with hybrid remote work, where one team might be speaking, but they're not speaking with the larger system. I noticed that within academia and within the enterprise. And so if we can make AI systems and companies and sales and things a little bit injected with some of these great ideas that are out there not being used, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think it makes a lot of sense that you probably have a lot more European demand, because the American attitude around failure is already aggressively against it. I feel like their American children are already pre-AI, pre-technology, under so much pressure to perform. And European children are not. It's just a completely different attitude around that. It's a completely different attitude around achievement and success, and also like a very narrow definition of success. How do you think, I think what's so hard for me to look at like the education system shifting with AI is like, I think it's really important obviously for children to learn to interact with it because they need to, but also when in their lives are they going to learn to think critically? When in their lives are they going to be forced to actually ingest information? It seems like I would just do half the schoolwork that exists. Like, have you thought about like, how do we shift the education system to kind of continue to challenge kids and like make them actually think that way? Because obviously school's a lot of flaws, but it did teach me that, right?
Yeah. And first, I think it comes to us solving now as adults, how are we going to interact with these systems in ways that are not harmful and not bad.
Absolutely.
And that starts with, I was quoted in a Forbes article a couple months ago that said only 9% of companies are equipped to handle the different challenges posed by AI. And actually someone wrote an op-ed after that. They think it's much fewer companies than that.
Wow.
There's another interesting thing that 90% of C-suite execs surveyed by BCG in last month said that they were waiting for AI to take the next step beyond the hype, or that they have only done initial pilots or initial experiments. And so if we're really at that level where it's just rudimentary, why are we accelerating so quickly into new realms? One heavy critique I have of artificial intelligence in companies is that while OpenAI has done so many amazing things and GPT Enterprise is incredible, and although I'm not a paid actor on behalf of them, I do really like it and value it.
Fantastic.
Their new video-based system, it's dangerous. There's a lot of potential implications on behalf of children, on behalf of vulnerable populations, on behalf of legal implications. And I think slowing down to make sure, first on the level of companies and individuals, as a parent, you can say, okay, do I understand these systems? Do I understand how to advocate for my child? Do I understand, for example, for Snapchat, making sure that if they are using that app, and if you don't want them interacting with my AI, take it off their phone, making little things that way. Also, making sure that the other parents within your child's social circle have similar understanding, so that there's not a outside social pressure that encourages your child to go outside of safety protocols, because there's so many dangerous things out there now. And that's important. But I really believe that we have to start with making intelligent systems that work both on a professional level, but also on humanity level. And Reed Blackman does a lot of interesting work on this. He wrote the book Ethical Machines, and he advocates for something called not bad AI. And so there's two kind of ways that we can look at AI from a good perspective. There's either we can do things for social good with AI, or we can make sure that we avoid the risks. And if we're just doing that, that actually also can help mitigate reputation management risks from a company end. So companies always think, oh, well, whatever, we'll just get this new system, But actually, that's not the way it should work. We should make sure that we're integrating systems that are avoiding a lot of these ethical protocols. And if people on here, whether they're a founder of a small company or thinking about it, or an executive, something interesting that Sam Altman said at Davos this year was, what can you do to make your internal workflow more efficient? So starting there, that internal workflow could be a household.
Yeah.
It could be a company. It could be your life. So I don't agree with everything that he says, but I did like that quote, in that what can you do to make your internal workflow more efficient? Think about that first and write 10 things down. Instead of getting an ad on Instagram or an inbound sales pitch around a software that you don't even know fits into your workflow or fits into your life or fits into something. So make sure that we're being proactive, and that's where that human side comes into it. Make sure that we're thinking critically about, from an enterprise level or from a personal level, what are we needing, and start slow. Because if we're getting 10 different softwares at once, I see this a lot of times with organizations. They'll come to Authentic Social and say, we have all these different things. The churn rate is high. We've spent millions of dollars on these systems that don't work. Well, that's because you weren't asking your people what they actually needed. And that goes on a personal level too, whether it's parents, whether it's, whatever it might be.
Wow. No, I think I love the internal workflow thing, because personally, my first thought was like my own brain. Like my own brain does not work great. And I think it's because it's like, because it's so
many distractions.
Much stimulation. And I think kind of going off this too, this idea of like the AI, the video implication, I think these AI generated social media influencers are so bad and like so unhealthy for children. It's all like, especially such young kids are exposed to the internet and like everything like that. How do you kind of see, do you see a way to use those positively? Because right now it feels to me like it's almost like promoting robots in like this weird and unhealthy, obviously unattainable way. Like it's obvious. I don't know.
What do you think the future of AI is
with that?
And quite frankly, no, I don't think that those AI generated influencers are a good thing. The only way that I think it could be good is maybe you could get some of these content creators in check. And that I think that the best content creators are people who have businesses outside of a platform. They're selling something, or they're designing and not selling something that's peddling garbage to the masses, which like selling merch or doing something stupid, but really creating an innovation or finding a gap in the marketplace and being true entrepreneurs. Those are the content creators who make it. I think that perhaps the advent of these AI generated content creators may push some of the people out of this crowded space. If you're just using your name and likeness and kind of just smiling for the camera and not really providing actual value for the listeners, then those people may kind of get off the content creation train, which perhaps could be good for the space as a whole. I think there's a lot of junk in the space, honestly. I think that there's a lot of people who just care about how viral they are or how much money they make or what awards they're getting, instead of actually looking at how can I add value to the space and how can I really make lasting change, and going offline for a little bit to do research, to do exciting projects, to create a work of art, to write a book, to actually learn, instead of just peddling garbage courses to the masses. But again, maybe these introduction of these AI influencers could help with that. But on the contrary, I think there's a lot of different scary things with using name and likeness in odd ways. Meta's new people with with some of the characters, that's very odd. It really gets into the realm of hyper reality, which Jean Baudrillard is my favorite author, and this idea of hyper reality, of something that's beyond the real, is really where we are right now. And grounding ourselves in this progression to analog is something that's important for everyone, because it's not getting rid of technology, and I want to emphasize that, but it's about having this balance in our lives, because the macro structural conversation here, that's a whole nother thing around why are we here and why are things like this. But on a personal level, figuring out, okay, there are these crazy AI influencers and all these things out there. Maybe I need to just monitor how much time I'm engaging with this content. or just choosing a couple influencers or a couple content creators that really add value to your life. And also engaging with some journalism that isn't just for likes and followers and
Right.
clicks. And we have to be careful about the fact that influencers a lot of times pretend that they're our friends and they're just trying to sell us something.
Yeah.
So that's fine, but make sure that you like what they're trying to
Right.
sell to you, or else your worldviews could be shifted by this. So it's important to just take some time to do some things in an analog way, whether it's reading or whether it's meditating or whether it's just going on a walk free of technology, taking out your headphones for a minute and just grounding yourself in where you are. Making sure one easy step is to just not go on your phone when you're with your friends, because every time you pick up your phone, the conversation goes back to that surface level. And so trying to make yourself more present, it will get you down to that more creative realm. If you're a potential founder who's listening to this, who's thinking, where is my creative idea? Where is this? Well, the way that I got way more creative and came up with all these crazy ideas that then led to me presenting research around the world and now having an office in Amsterdam and all these things is because I just went off of my phone for a little bit and dove into that creation and ideation. And that's so important for founders, for everyone listening to this, because that's the way we can get to true creativity and connection.
Yeah. No, that's very inspiring. This was a very thought-provoking discussion. I guess like one last question before we wrap up is, what motivates you? What keeps you going on a more personal level, or research, you know?
That's interesting. I think a couple things. As someone who wants to be a parent one day, I want to create a world that's better than it is now in terms of balancing technology. I hear a lot about young people, especially young girls, suffering from mental health issues as a result of technology. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. But also communication is something and technology has been something I've been interested in since I was very little. And I think just diving into a long-term passion project is something where I'm constantly finding new things to read and new places to go. And having more of a connection now to Europe is really motivating to me, and spending time with friends and outside of the research realm who I can always converse with about these topics. And sometimes you get a, what are you talking about? And that helps me to do
20% of the time.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's amazing. Like, obviously, like, you're just so passionate. So
Yeah.
I love seeing the passion.
Yeah, and this joint optimization of social and technical systems, of making people realize that we can have both in a more refined way of balancing technology and analog life, that's important to me too, is kind of spreading that gospel.
I love that.
Awesome.
Oh, it's amazing. I think it's like a great place to end. Honestly, Kate, thanks so much for coming on. You're super inspiring, and it definitely will get me thinking about my life.
Yeah. And everyone listen to Katie's podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Progression to Analog.
And thanks so much for joining Womansplain. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much.
you.